Don't drop the good one. Which one, Zeke?
We are Zeke and Terri, empty nest travel adventurers from the San Francisco Bay Area.
In our videos, we share how two totally different people with completely different expectations for travel plan, compromise, and deepen our relationship as we travel the world, mostly together. We grew up in Northern California where we really don't have seasons. When our youngest decided to go to college in Vermont, while I wasn't thrilled that they would be so far away, it did open up the world to us in a whole new way.
Neither of us have spent much time on the East Coast, and definitely not in the Northeast. So during a trip to Montreal and Burlington, Vermont, we did what we'd only seen people do in Hallmark movies. We went apple picking and to see the covered bridges in Vermont.
Being Californians, we rented a Tesla and of course had to start the day charging in Plattsburgh, New York, before we went to our first apple orchard.
As we mentioned in the Mont Tremblant field trip video, we are curious to see what's available to occupy our time while we are charging. There's nothing like wandering through a Lowe's and then picking up a tuna poke bowl from a local market while you're waiting.
Well, at least we got some protein. We asked the checker at the market where to go to pick apples and get the best apple cider donut. And after they debated with the other people in line, we were directed to Banker Orchards in Plattsburgh and Hackett's Orchard in South Hero, Vermont.
Banker's Orchard was on Route 3 and hard to miss, with the petting zoo and all of the pumpkins, not unlike some of the pumpkin patches we have here in Northern California.
We got 2 apple cider donuts and wandered around their gift shop and got back on the road. There were lots of apples in bags and bins, probably bushels and a peck, but none for us to pick. I think we were late in the season or in between the different apple crops.
Our next stop, Hackett's Orchard, was in South Hero, Vermont on Grand Isle, the largest island in Lake Champlain. To get to the island, we had to take a car ferry.
And this is definitely not a Californian experience, and we weren't quite sure what to expect. It ended up costing under $20 and took about 15 minutes, and it was really very efficient. I monitored our progress with the map on the screen of our Tesla to see if it would lose us.
As we drove around South Hero to get to Hackett's, it felt like we were in small town Americana. Even with the rainy and gray day, it was beautiful. Hackett's Orchard grows 47 varieties of apples. This family-owned orchard offers a wide variety of apple types, along with other products like maple syrup, produce, cider donuts, and other Vermont specialties.
When we got to the orchard and got our bag to go pick apples, we paid something like $8 for the bag. We spent most of the time picking and tasting them and moving on since we were leaving the very next day, and we weren't sure if we could take fruit across the border.
Because of the Mediterranean fruit fly in the 80s, you can't bring produce into California, so we assume there are similar rules for other countries.
We picked all 8 varieties that were available to be picked that day per the list at the register when we paid for the apples. We pretty much had the place to ourselves since it was a Monday.
We couldn't resist buying the orchard's apple cider and homemade apple pie, which put us over our sugar limit for the day.
We definitely left on a sugar high, which wasn't helpful since it took us forever to find a place for a very late lunch, as we also looked for covered bridges. We had very little phone reception and no idea where we were, but the scenery was gorgeous and everything was so green.
I think we drove by the same painted silos at least 3 times until we found the road to Martell's Fox, one of the few restaurants open in the area. It was old school and very quiet, probably because it was a Monday afternoon. It was more of a roadhouse than a restaurant, with a dance floor stage and signed pictures of some familiar musicians on the wall.
Everything was pretty sticky, and I imagine that it's probably hopping on a Friday or a Saturday night. We got back on the road in search of covered bridges. Some were fairly well marked and others took some time to find. We thought we were driving on a small road until we took even smaller roads to get to the bridges.
We know nothing about these bridges and cannot even tell you where to find them, but we did enjoy driving around, enjoying the scenery, and being okay with being lost.
And eventually getting back to Canada.
Eventually.
say that our return to Canada was without issue, but Zeke decided that the signs at the border did not apply to him and got reprimanded by the solo Canadian border agent for not following directions.
In my defense, there was no one else there, and it didn't make sense to wait at the stop sign.
It was definitely a different experience from the border crossing on the New York side, although that was pretty easy too. It was just a little outpost, and the border agent was really confused as to why we as Americans had gone from California to Montreal to New York and then Vermont and back to Canada, only to be leaving for California the very next day.
A few other things to note when crossing the border: you will need your passport.
And we have global entry, and I thought we could use it to expedite getting into the US by car, but there was no special lane for global entry. Fortunately, the crossing was easy going into New York from Canada. But if you have a choice, choose one of the smaller border crossings since they are pretty cute.
And they don't mind if you just ignore all the signs.
And don't wait for them to wave you through.
If you are wondering why we stayed in Montreal to begin with, when our kid was in Vermont, the biggest reason was price. Because of the fall colors and the leaf peepers, everything is more expensive in the fall, and I found a reasonably priced Airbnb in downtown Montreal.
It was pretty great. We were able to get a direct flight to Montreal, and the plan was to drive to Burlington and pick up our kid and their friend and bring them both back to Montreal for the weekend, and then return them to Burlington on Sunday night.
But our kid got COVID, and we only got to see them for a day outside, which meant we had extra time for this field trip and the field trip to Mont Tremblant.
Since the drive from Montreal to Burlington is about an hour and a half, it's almost easier and faster to fly direct to Montreal, rent a car, and drive to Burlington. And Montreal is a fantastic city, which we will talk about in another video very soon.
Thanks for joining us on our apple-picking covered bridge crossing New York and Vermont field trip. We hope you enjoyed the view.
If you are ever in Montreal and looking for a fun one-day adventure, this is a really good one, but we also recommend Mont Tremblant in Quebec, Canada, as we share in our Mont Tremblant field trip video.
If you like this video and want to see more like it, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate your time and interest.
And now, back to navigating our lives and the world
together.